Elizabethtown College. And this is one of the sessions where you get to write down your questions. So they'll each speak for a certain amount of time, and then there'll be remaining time will be left for answering questions. So we can start now. Mataji and Jeff? Yeah. Before the panel discussion starts, we'll start out with a song from Vaishani, Vaishani Das or Rai. Okay.
আকাশে জুড়ে শুনিনু ওই বাজে আকাশে জুড়ে শুনিনু ওই বাজে তোমারি নাম সকল তারার মাঝে ওই বাজে আকাশে জুড়ে শুনিনু ওই বাজে সেই নাম খানি নেমে এলো ভুয়ে কখন আমালাতিল ছুঁয়ে সেই নাম খানি নেমে এলো ভুয়ে কখন আমালাতিল ছুঁয়ে শান্তি ধারায় বেদন গেল ধুয়ে আপন আমার আপনি মোরে লাগে ওই বাজে আকাশে জুড়ে শুনিনু ওই বাজে মন মিলে যায় আজ নীরব রাতে তারাই ভরা ওই গগনের সাথে মন মিলে যায় আজ নীরব রাতে তারাই ভরা ওই গগনের সাথে অমনি করে আমার হৃদয় তোমার নামে হোক না নামময় অমনি করে আমার হৃদয় তোমার নামে হোক না নামময় আধারে মোর তোমার আলো জয় গবি হয়ে থাক জীবনে কাজে ওই বাজে আকাশে জুড়ে শুনিনু ওই বাজে তোমারি নাম সকল তারার মাঝে ওই বাজে আকাশে জুড়ে শুনিনু ওই বাজে
Should I start?
Oh, yeah?
Good. I want to say a few words about the chosen ideal. Soon after I joined the Sri Math in Dakshineshwar, I went to Belur Math, taking along with me another novice nun who had recently joined. And after going to all the temples, I took her to meet Bharat Maharaj, Swami Swahananda, who was the manager of the Math. Well, he asked, well, you have just recently joined the Math, so how is your spiritual life coming along? And this new novice came in, and she said, oh, Maharaj, I want to realize God. And that was the wrong thing to say to Maharaj. He was of Advaitic bent of mind. And he fairly burst in her face and said, oh, you want to realize God. Everybody wants to realize God. Nobody knows what God is, but they want to realize God. And this poor novice was shaking, shattered, and I thought I could save the situation by saying, well, we don't know what God is, Maharaj, but we know that Sri Ramakrishna was infinitely loving and infinitely broad-minded. He was very happy with that because he said, oh, Sri Ramakrishna is infinite. And then he was happy. So Sri Ramakrishna said it is easy, it is difficult to imagine the infinite in our meditation, but it is rather easy to meditate on an incarnation of God. A God as a human, with a human form, like a lantern with a light inside. And that primordial Om that resonates and creates this phenomenal world is also Om Krishna, Om Kali, Om Shiva. It's only in Hinduism that we have the concept of a chosen ideal. In all other religions that I can understand, the chosen ideal is a given, fixed. In Christianity, it's Jesus, whether it's the bambino, the baby Jesus, or Jesus on the cross. In Zoroastrianism, Zoroaster and the sacred flame. In Buddhism, the Buddha is revered. In all other religions, as far as I know, this concept is not there, that we choose our ideal and we have innumerable ideals to choose from. So there are two types, actually, of devotees, we can say. Those who are devotees, those who are yogis. The devotees practice meditation to increase their devotion. And the yogis concentrate on their devotion for some particular deity, so that they will increase their capacity to meditate. It's a sort of opposite or reverse ideals. But I once, brazen as I was, and newly initiated, asked my guru, well, can one then also, since dhyana is attained by a certain length of concentration, dharana, and then a certain length of concentration on and meditation, it becomes samadhi. So why can't one simply meditate on a potato or a stone? Why have to choose a form of a human form? And the answer was, well, you have to use so much energy to concentrate sufficiently to realize, and you can never do that unless you love the ideal. You can't love a potato or a stone. So the idea is to have to summon as much love as you can on your, and to realize your ideal. So then I began to think a bit differently about it. Unless the one thing that is needed for spiritual life, Sri Ramakrishna says, is vyakulata, or yearning, mumukshutva. You have to have a tremendous yearning to be free or to realize. Otherwise, you won't be able to bring your mind to any point of concentration. And then how do you do that? Well, if you want to learn to swim, you have to get into the water. Sri Ramakrishna used to keep a book with him it was quotes from various scriptures. And he always kept that in his room, it seems. Now, they had that book on display in the museum in Belur Math, and on the title page, Sri Ramakrishna had written, "Je ja chaibe, she tai paibe." What one wants, that he will get. It's the guru who shows the chosen ideal to the disciple. And eventually, if you realize the ideal, you realize the guru dissolving into that ideal. So the question is whether the ideal chooses us or we choose the ideal. Because it occurs to me that Sri Ramakrishna used to roam the streets of Calcutta as much as his frail body could, to the houses of devotees or would-be devotees, and he shouted from the rooftop of his of the Kuti mansion, calling for his disciples and devotees. So was it the avatar, the chosen ideal who calls us, or do we seek the ideal? There's an interesting quote in this Prashnottara. I don't know if you have a copy of it. I would suggest if you don't have a copy of the book, you should get one and review it after this retreat is over. There are some very beautiful slokas, even that we didn't get to. There's one, number 55, that I like very much. It goes, Kaha Sura, Yo Bhita Trata, Trata Chakka, Sadguru. Ko hi Jagat Guru Uktaha, Shambhu Jnanam Kuta, Shiva Deva. It's translated as, who is the Guru? It is he who gives protection to the frightened ones. Who is a true protector? A spiritual teacher. Who is the spiritual teacher for the whole world? It is Shambhu, Shiva, the Supreme Being, from whom does one acquire knowledge? From Shiva, indeed. Shiva being the Supreme Lord. I would like to then turn over, if I may, to Jeffrey, Dr. Jeffrey Long.
Thank you so much, Pravrajika, Prabuddhaprana. We really appreciate everything you've said. The two of us have not coordinated our remarks in advance, yet there's this beautiful, I think, synergy between what the Pravrajika has just said and what I'm planning to say. Pravrajika, Prabuddhaprana has really focused on that very intense, single-minded devotion to and relationship with our ideal, with our Ishta, which is absolutely central to the spiritual life. I want to focus on something, we were told to talk about aspects of spiritual life. So I want to talk about a different aspect, which in some ways may seem different, but I don't think it is. I think they really are, we're talking about different facets of the one reality. And what I'm going to talk about sounds much more diffuse. I'm thinking of, if you know this very famous book in our tradition by Swami Swahananda called Seeing God Everywhere. And I want to talk about seeing God everywhere. And I'm especially thinking about all of us householders who are here. And we may have our ideal, and we may focus on that very intently, but we also have jobs, we have responsibilities, we have houses where things break down and we have to fix them. A lot of us have children. So how do we live a spiritual life and not see either of these dimensions, either our focus on spirituality or our, what we might call our mundane life? How do we prevent either of these from seeming like a distraction from the other, right? If we see our mundane life as a distraction, we may begin resenting our dharma, right? We might begin resenting our families and everything that takes us away from spirituality. On the other hand, we might get so caught up in our work and our worldly life that, heaven forbid, spiritual life starts to seem like a distraction, and that would be fatal to spiritual life. So a way to prevent that is to spiritualize the mundane, to see God everywhere. And we have a wonderful foundation for that. In the Upanishads, it says, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahman. All of this indeed is Brahman. Brahman has become all. And Sri Ramakrishna's life and teachings are the most wonderful commentary on the Upanishads. And he tells us that through the process of neti, through the process of eliminating the material world, it eventually vanishes and we realize there is only Brahman. But then he says there is a stage even beyond that jnana, that knowledge, what he calls vijnana, which is to see that then Brahman has in fact become this whole world, that all this is Brahman. So if all this is Brahman, then we should be seeing God all the time. There's the very famous dialogue where Swami Vivekananda to be, right? Narendranath Datta came to Sri Ramakrishna and said, have you seen God? And unlike anyone else whom he had asked this question, Ramakrishna said, yes, in fact, more intensely than I'm seeing you right now. And so we're actually all seeing God all the time. If you want to say, where is God? Just look around. And it's the people. It's also the chairs. It's the stones and the potatoes, though that takes much more effort, as Pravrajika Prabuddhaprana said. But God is everywhere, in everything. And also, God being infinite can be conceived in infinitely many ways. So some traditions talk about a person, a human ideal. And as Pravrajika Prabuddhaprana also said, in most traditions that ideal is set. Okay, if you're a Christian, this is your ideal, and so on. In our tradition, we can choose many possible ideals. At the same time, though, there is divinity everywhere and in everything. There's another wonderful passage from the Upanishads. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the sage Yajnavalkya is about to go and renounce. And he has 2 wives. And one of his wives comes to him and says, please share with me your teaching. He says, I've already provided you with everything. You're going to have a good life. She said, no, you've just provided me with my material sustenance. I need spiritual sustenance. I need wisdom. And so because she's feeling very sad that her husband is leaving, he says to her, the husband is dear actually because of the divinity within, right? The self within, the Atman. And the wife is dear because of the Atman. And then he goes in this long litany. Children are dear because of the Atman. All the different social categories, all the different plants and animals. He sort of talks about the whole range of reality. And for each line, he says, this is dear, not for itself, but for the Atman within. So in some traditions, like the Buddhist tradition, the ideal, there is a person, there's the Buddha. In fact, there are many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. But the ideal really is a kind of abstraction, a kind of nature of reality. And it's not unlike the concept of Nirguna Brahman. And I want to narrate a couple of accounts from a 13th century Zen master from Japan named Dogen. He's one of my favorite Buddhist authors. And there's a collection of his essays called the Shobogenzo. He was a founder of the Soto Zen school in Japan. And he's talking about the nature of reality, ultimate reality, what we call Brahman. And he says, the nature of reality is eating breakfast, eating lunch, and having a snack. You think, what could that mean? Is he some kind of glutton? Is he a hedonist? No, he's seeing the presence of the ultimate reality in the mundane day-to-day life, something as simple as the food we eat. God is in that, right? He doesn't use the term God, he's a good Buddhist, but he's talking about the ultimate reality. Dogen himself learned this lesson in China. He went to study Zen in China. It's called Chan. You all might know this. Dhyana, the term for meditation in Sanskrit, becomes Chan in Chinese and then Zen in Japanese. So these traditions are all connected. So Dogen went to China to study Zen when he was still starting out, right? Before he wrote the line about the breakfast and the lunch and so on. So he arrived at the seaport, got off the boat, and there was a monk from the monastery to greet him, where he'd already arranged to stay. So the monk is driving a cart, and he takes Dogen to the monastery. And on the way, they have the most wonderful conversation about dharma, about the nature of reality. And Dogen begins to think, this man may in fact be an enlightened being. He's so wise. They arrive at the monastery, and they continue speaking as they go inside. And the monk proceeds to lead him down to the kitchen, where he starts chopping up vegetables and preparing the meal for the other monks. He's the cook. He's the chef of the monastery. And Dogen says, a monk as wise as you should be the abbot of this monastery, not working in the kitchen. And the monk smiled at him and said, you obviously have a lot to learn about Zen. So he was seeing the presence right there in the act of when you mentioned potato, I was thinking about, I'm about to tell this story. He's seeing it in the potato, right? He's seeing it in everything. And this is our challenge, I think, to see divinity even in tasks that can seem mundane and distracting. That this has been given to us. Whatever, if we're seeing God everywhere, I think one key to that is to see every experience as a gift that we've been given, an opportunity, sometimes a challenge, to deepen our spirituality and deepen our engagement with divinity. And it can be difficult because some of the experiences we have aren't necessarily pleasant. I was very pleased when Swami Kripayananda mentioned yesterday, there's some people you don't like to be around as much. I mean, it's just true, right? We would not be honest if we denied that. But that's also God, right? That's also God. And so how to open our minds and see God everywhere is really the key. I think some of us, I was talking with this gentleman over here during the tea time and who's aspiring to go into my field. And I think in some ways I'm very fortunate because part of my job involves just talking about these things all the time. Right? So I get to keep my mind dipped in this material even when I'm doing my mundane task. And it does keep me, I think, it really helps keep me on the path. Many, many years ago, when I was still a graduate student in Chicago, I had a very, very frustrating day. Do any of you remember back in the days when it would get really cold and cars would not start? And so my car wouldn't start. I had to run to the nearest train station to get to my teaching job on time. And it was slippery, it was icy, it was cold. The train station was crowded. People were rude, you know. It was, and I got to my class just in a thoroughly foul mood, and I had to talk about the Buddha that day. I can't talk about the Buddha with an impure mind like that. I just had to take a breath and kind of get myself into that mode, and remind myself that there were. We just have to accept some of these things that happen and adapt. And if nothing else, we can see an experience like that, those difficulties. Maybe I just burned off some karma. Yay, good for me. Just to think of it in a positive way as much as possible. And I think with jobs that don't obviously apply to spiritual topics, I think it might be a bit harder. But whatever you're doing, whatever your field, in some way you're serving humanity. In some way you're doing something that is for the good of all beings. You're contributing in your particular way. Maybe it's large, maybe it's small, but you're contributing. And if you find that your career, your job is not contributing to humanity in a positive way, then it's maybe a good idea to change careers. I keep invoking Buddhism today. I don't know, maybe I'm just in a Buddhist mood, but there's something, part of the Eightfold Path is called right livelihood. Doing a job that doesn't distract you from your spiritual path, but actually supports you and sustains you in it. So those are just some thoughts about that aspect of spiritual life. So I guess we answered that. Would you like to do the first one?
Okay. Oh, it's a long one. In this morning's session, we heard that a successful life is the one that does not have any criticism. How
practical is it?
Practical is it? I can't read the handwriting.
In an ideal world, even a person who did a lot of good work for others, in the actual world, even a person who does a lot of good work for others suffers criticism. If a family man donates a lot, he suffers criticism from other family members.
Sounds like one for you, not me. I don't know the first
I wonder if, I think there might be a little misunderstanding. That
yeah.
I think being above reproach is different from actually being reproached. You may be above reproach, and there still may be plenty of people who criticize you because of their, so I don't think it means someone criticizes you, therefore there's something wrong with your life. In fact, it might mean you're doing something right, depending on who the critic is and what they're saying. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why a person would be worried about being criticized.
Yeah. That's right.
Let's see, try another one.
Okay. Isn't it that our ethics or sense of right or wrong is rooted in spirituality? That's one question. Then there's a second one there. What do you think of that one? Our sense of right and wrong, is it rooted in spirituality?
In spirituality. It's such a broad question. According to one's spiritual state, or well, I can't can you modify the question?
Maybe. So isn't our ethics or sense of right and wrong rooted in spirituality? As I understand Vedanta, and in fact the Swami was explaining this yesterday too, based on Shankara's text, what is good or right is what takes us toward our goal of moksha, right? Takes us toward our goal of liberation. And what is wrong is what takes us away from that. Now, our sense of right or wrong may be different because it might be instilled in us by our culture and our society and our family, and it might be a little off. Right? So our sense of right or wrong may come from a lot of different sources, but I would think that the more we progress, we would get in touch with our authentic spirituality, and maybe that would help us.
Yeah, otherwise it's relative to culture, time, circumstances. It's difficult to say.
So the second question is: should children in school should this sense of sanity be part of the syllabus? should we teach right and wrong in school?
Well, that's a good idea to help children to discriminate between right and wrong. I think it can be taught much more in schools than it is today.
I think we have, as a society, been somewhat led astray by what was originally a good intention. Right? So there was a time when morality and ethics were taught in school, but it was in a very narrow way. It was rooted in just one tradition. And then we began to realize, well, we're a very diverse society, so we can't do that. So then they stopped doing it at all.
Absolutely removed.
Absolutely remote. And I think a curriculum that would draw on the shared values of the traditions, the shared wisdom.
Ethics can be taught in schools.
Can be taught, exactly. Without imposing just one tradition.
But it was when I was a child. I remember in the second grade above the blackboard it was written in large letters. Keep in mind that celestial light of conscience. And I think it was some quote from Roosevelt or somebody, but it impressed me because I remembered it the rest of my life.
So yes. Okay.
Let's see. Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana outlook. Brahman has become everything. How to see God in the evil happening in the world. Well, it's a difficult question to answer. Sometimes when we see something wrong happening, we know that we shouldn't do it. Both good and evil are teachers. And we can only learn discrimination if we see both. If you see only one side, you can't practice discrimination, you can't learn from it. So evil can also teach us that.
I'm grateful to know that, because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Oh.
So I'm very happy that you said that. It can teach us, and without it, then we don't have a full appreciation or knowledge of the good. And I sometimes, when students we'll talk about like why has Brahman sort of disappeared behind the veil of Maya, right? Is there some purpose to that? And I'll tell the story about someone who has lost their pet, right? They have a little dog that they love, and they enjoy every day taking their little dog for a walk and petting their little dog. And then the little dog disappears, and they're heartbroken, and they're worried, they're distraught. They put up all kinds of signs. Have you seen my little dog? And then finally, a few days later, they get a call. Yes, we found your little dog. And they bring the little dog back, and the dog's happy, you're happy. So what is more intense, the happiness of just having your little dog with you all the time, or that reunion that came from the parting that was painful? And it gave depth to that. It let a deeper dimension of that love come forth. That's how I like to think of it. It's difficult sometimes, because when we see so many truly horrible things happen in the world, we don't want to think of it in a way that gives comfort to ourselves, right? That makes us feel better about other people's suffering. I think that's a problem.
Seeing it, we can know that we won't do that.
Exactly. We can respond to what we can respond to and learn from it. Okay, seeing God in all. Honestly, it is much easier to see divinity in a potato than to see it in an oppressive ruler illegally occupying a land and oppressing its helpless people. I agree. How to see God in this, or even in the population that supports this, it's quite a struggle. I think it's kind of an extension of the previous question, right?
Yeah, but somebody suggested that Aurangzeb had some positive result in his effort to unite the country in some way. I don't know. You can see evil. I mean, in all these things, you can see some good. It depends on your outlook.
Yeah, and seeing God doesn't necessarily mean that particular form is the ideal form. That might be a form that's there precisely to show us how not to be. There's that famous story of Ramakrishna mentioning, talking about God being everywhere, and someone says, "What about in a tiger?" And he says, "Worship the tiger god from a distance." So keep it away. There are even people in our lives that might be very destructive, and we might find it the wiser thing to just avoid them. That doesn't mean we don't love them on that deeper level of understanding that there's divinity present within that being. But it's not for us to approach that being at this time, right? We see something evil happening in the world, we speak out against it. We say that this is wrong, this shouldn't happen. We use the tools available to us without falling into the trap of thinking that we know all, right? Because we also sometimes see things happening that we might object to, and then when we find out a little more, we realize, someone who might appear to be acting very inappropriately might actually be quite justified in what they're doing. We don't know the whole story. So there's that balance of, criticizing what we have a duty to criticize while not slipping into judgmentalism. Okay, this is a very deep question.
So you give it to me. When I am meditating, I create a visual image of my Ishta, and create visual images of all that is associated with my Ishta. When would that imagination become a reality? Is that ever possible? Sometimes I wonder if I am getting carried away with my imagination. Well, no. I think at least is my understanding, that you can be creative about your spiritual life and practice, and whatever means you use to deepen your meditation, that you can use. Does that answer the question, do you say?
I think so. I think
Okay,
so.
let's
As best
take
we can,
another.
yeah. Here's an interesting one. This is one I've thought about a lot, and I'll try not to speak too long about it because I could give a whole talk on this one. But someone writes, I've heard that Jesus said, "No one shall reach God except through me." What is the proper interpretation of these words so that they can be reconciled with the infinity of the divine, including his own divinity? So I have many, many thoughts on that. One interpretation I very much disagree with is that he's saying everyone has to join the Christian faith and Jesus has to be their ideal and that no one else is reaching God. That means that billions and billions of human beings have lived and been created by God, knowing that they weren't going to make it. And so, that makes God a celestial tyrant. I don't agree with that. So my sense, and this is just my opinion, I'm not claiming to be authoritative here, but I think there are two possible interpretations of this. One, Sri Ramakrishna said the scriptures are a mix of sand and sugar. I don't know that Jesus said this. It's in the gospel, but the gospels were written some years after he would have lived. And we know there was theological debate even very early on in the church about what Jesus was, what his teachings meant, and so on. Let's work, though, the other option is let's work with the assumption that the scriptures are true and that we are meant to wrestle with them and think through them. And I think a Vedantic understanding of what Jesus is saying is that the me, the I that is speaking then, is that universal consciousness, that universal self that he had fully realized and manifested. And that, in fact, there's an interesting experiment you can do. I wrote an article about this a few years ago. There's an interesting verse of the Gita that is somewhat parallel to this, where in the 11th verse of the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, "In whatever way beings approach me, thus do I receive them. All paths lead to me." Now that seems like the opposite of what Jesus is saying, except what if you put them together? Then you have whatsoever path living beings take, in whatever way living beings approach me, thus do I receive them. All paths lead to me, and only through me can you reach God. Please.
Swami also said, we can never know God except through the incarnation.
Yes. And he's speaking and then as an incarnation. Right. So it becomes not an exclusive claim, but a claim that we do need to have this embodiment in order to approach and understand and really experience the infinite from this finite starting point. Okay, thank you.
This is a very strange question, which is, it looks like a personal question. Who is your hero and why? Now, we can't answer it in a personal way, but I would say my chosen ideal is my hero, because I chose that ideal.
That's right.
Finished.
Or your chosen ideal chose you.
Yeah,
Yes.
or, yeah, however it worked. Now, let's see another one. Age-old question. We can read the handwriting.
We talk.
Yeah, thank you. You can read handwriting better than...
Yeah. Age-old question. We talk about God as benevolent, love, and all-merciful. We see more and more violence in the world. How to explain this in a spiritual sense? So, you want to go for it? Or
More violence in the world.
more violence in the world. Steven Pinker would disagree. I don't know if anyone's read his book, Our Better Angels. He does a statistical study and notes that the actual amount of death and mayhem in the world has been going down over the last century, and that we're more aware of violence happening, and that our tolerance for it is much less, and that's a good thing.
There's more media these
More,
days.
yeah.
And-
As many people died in World War II in a single day as died in the entire Second Gulf War. So he would say that's not
Yeah,
actually true.
but Swamiji has said somewhere that the world doesn't change. It's the same good and evil every time. It doesn't.
It just takes a different form.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all.
Now we got climate change, which they didn't have 100 years ago. So.
Yeah, but there was maybe something else.
Yeah, there was something
Okay,
else.
there's only one.
So, well, I
two
think
more.
that the deeper question,
Yeah,
I think, is
two
just like, is why is there evil, right? I mean, and which I think we've seen, and it's kind of been a subtext of a couple of the questions. Oh, we've got them all. These are all blanks, or there are people doing like a Zen experiment with us, right? So we're just supposed to, some Zen thing, we're supposed to just look at it and become awakened. But I really like what Swami Vivekananda says in the Karma Yoga, where he does that comparison of the dog, the curly tail of the dog
Yeah,
with the
it
evil in
can't
the
be
world. He says you
straightened.
can pull it and try to make it straight and it just flips back. And then he says, it's not that it's pointless to try to do good and correct the evil in the world, but the point of that is ultimately not what it seems on the surface. It's how we are transformed by doing that. By becoming unselfish, he says the world is like a grand moral gymnasium in which we take our spiritual exercise to become stronger. And so it's like the evil in the world, the problems in the world, it's like exercise equipment in the gym. You don't lift weights because the weights need to be moved from one place to another. You're lifting them to strengthen your muscles. So similarly, we're trying to solve problems, and we're very serious about it. And we may solve that problem, but then maybe another problem will pop up. Very often, our solution to one problem creates the next problem. And Swami Atmarupananda, I once heard speak about this. He just used this very simple but beautiful phrase. He said, life is problem solving. We're here to solve problems. We're here to fix things, but not to fix those things, but the effort to fix those things helps fix us, make us less egotistic, see ourselves as servants of the world.
No more questions.
There's questions from the audience also.
Has everyone reached enlightenment? Is that? Yeah. A student once asked me if he would get an A in my class if he got enlightenment that semester, and I told him if you get enlightenment, you won't care whether you get an A. And he didn't care for that answer for some reason. Wouldn't it be better to just not worry about it? Yes. Yes. Well, maybe there is an incarnation that is not an incarnation. There is the formless form, the invisible form. There's an old tradition in India of something called Nirguna Bhakti, devotion to God without form. So it seems to contradict, but even the idea of formlessness is an idea. Right? It's a limitation that we put around the infinite and then focus all of our attention on that and all of our devotion to that. It seems it would be a more difficult path. Not being able to visualize something. I think very often people, even despite themselves, visualize something when they're thinking about the invisible God. They see a light or something of that sort. The ocean. Michelangelo's Old Man in the Sky on the Sistine Chapel. You know. But there's this, now the Gita is not exactly talking about this, but when Arjuna asks, is bhakti or jnana the better path? Krishna says they both reach the goal, but jnana is harder. I think nirguna bhakti might in some sense be harder as well. But you can still think of something like an invisible presence. When I was growing up, this is how I often thought of God. It was sort of an invisible presence. So you could say that is also paradoxically a kind of incarnation, because it's still an idea that we have that is not simply identical with the infinite. I don't know.
Yes. Sri Ramakrishna doesn't encourage it, though, because it's difficult. It's difficult enough to have an idea of an incarnation. To conceive of the infinite is difficult to practice.
You just reminded me, I think the very first conversation in the Gospel, in the Katamrita, speaks with Sri Ramakrishna, and as he's leaving, Ramakrishna asks him, do you believe in God with form or without form? And M says, without form, because he's a Brahmo Samaji. And Ramakrishna said, good, that's good. And he says, but with form is also good. So that we could take either of these routes. Well, a lot of saints have come through it. Like Swami Vivekananda himself started he was in the Brahmo Samaj, and yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. Yeah, there's this really powerful poem. It's not a poem exactly. It's a first-person account by Devendranath Tagore, father of Rabindranath, and he talks about a vision that he had, where he saw the nature of God open up to him, and then it closed. And he said, you've been given this vision. He heard a voice say, you've been given this vision so that you will continue to strive toward me, but you will not see this vision again in this lifetime. So it sounds like it's harder to do it that way. But
Swami Vivekananda also was striving for, but which he had a taste of, and Sri Ramakrishna kept the key, said he wouldn't have it so easily again. But Swami Vivekananda's ideal also was Ram, so he also meditated on a chosen ideal.
I think that idea of stagnancy itself is relative to the realm of space-time and causation. Like something can only be stagnant because it is changeless relative to a changing world. But when we're talking about Brahman, we're talking about something that is just utterly beyond that. So I wouldn't say stagnant, because we're not talking about, I mean, we can use images like this, but we're not talking about something like a rock that's just kind of there and not moving while everything else is moving. We're talking about that which is the ultimate source of all of this. And in a sense, all of this is the embodiment of Brahman. Some of you know I've done a lot of scholarship on Jainism, and in Jain logic they have this wonderful way of saying that something can be both X and not X in different senses. I would say Brahman is both changing and changeless and neither. It's infinite, it's beyond our comprehension. So we can speak of it in these ways because in certain contexts, speaking of it as changeless makes sense. Because when we're talking about the world as ephemeral and unreliable and not an ultimate source of happiness, then what's the alternative? Well, something that doesn't change. But then if you're thinking of something that's stagnant, well, that doesn't sound appealing at all. You know, let us go to our stagnant goal. You know, it doesn't sound like what we want to do. So we have to then conceptualize it in another way. So then you have a personal deity who's active and engaged with the world, and driving a chariot and doing things like that. But that also. But then we can at a certain point object, say, but isn't that limiting? Isn't God much beyond something that could be riding around in a chariot? So this is the great mystery: is that it's both and neither. Right? It's something utterly beyond.
The thing is that we can have that concept. We may not be able to realize it in practice, but we have the concept.
Right.
We have the concept of infinity. How did we get it?
Right.
I mean, we can theoretically imagine that there is an infinite, but actually realizing that infinite is something else.
So then we can never realize Brahman.
Not with the intellect, no. We have to be it. We have to realize as opposed to intellectualize. And so, this word vijnana is very interesting because that prefix vi, it can mean something beyond. This is how we derive vijnana very often. But if you think of like a word like videshi, right, it means the opposite of it, means not. It is knowledge that is not knowledge. That it's not the intellectual knowledge, but it is something that is felt as one's whole being. And the intellectual knowledge can move us in that direction. But and again, I'm going to go back to Buddhism. There's the Zen image of the finger pointing at the moon. It's not the moon, but it can help direct your attention in the right direction. So these concepts of Brahman and God and so on, and even our Ishta, at a certain point, we merge with that. We go beyond that. And that is something that we do and embody. It's not really knowledge. Yeah, coming from the tradition I grew up in, the Catholic tradition, there's a story of St. Augustine who was writing his famous work on the Trinity. And he was really having difficulty because it's a mind-bending concept, right? And so it's almost like a Zen koan. How can something be three in one at the same time? So he went for a walk on the beach, decided to take a break. And according to the story, he met a small child, turned out to be an angel in disguise. This child was digging a hole in the beach. And St. Augustine said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm digging a hole and I'm going to put the ocean in this hole." And St. Augustine laughed at the child. He said, "Well, you know that's not possible. The ocean's much bigger." Right? And then the angel reveals himself and says, "In the same way, your finite mind cannot comprehend the Trinity." So that's where we're left. So we're left with concepts that are at best approximations of a reality that can only be experienced and realized directly. Yes?
I was wondering, what is your thought on Nirvana and resurrection? There is always a similarity that in Trinity, for example, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahasaya, and in Christianity also Trinity. So in one form or the other, so there are some similarities in all of these concepts in spirituality.
There are. There's some differences too, but there are similarities. Of course, you have the number 3. That's the obvious one. And you have Brahma, the creator, God the Father, the creator. You have Vishnu, the preserver. Preserver of what? Preserver of dharma. And he preserved dharma by coming into the world whenever dharma declines, right? We know yada yada hi dharmasya glanirabhavati bharata, etc. We know that he comes into the world. So that's kind of like God the Son, right? Coming into the world. Shiva and the Holy Spirit seem very different concepts. Because in the Trimurti, Shiva brings the world to an end so that it can be regenerated, right? I think the real analogy between the Christian Trinity and something we might see in Hindu tradition would be Brahma, Vishnu, and Shakti. Shakti that concept has a lot of affinity with the idea of Holy Spirit. And interestingly, even the original word that gets translated as Holy Spirit is a feminine word in the original language. So you have the idea of, in Hebrew they call it the Shekinah, it was the divine presence in the temple. And that's a female presence. And so, I mean, I'm tempted to say these are two different cultures talking about the same reality. Yeah. And if you look in terms of actual Hindu worship, what's popular, Shiva's more like the father. You get Vishnu, the son, and then Shakti, right? The Father, the Son, and the Holy Mother. That's the real, that's the Trinity that we're looking at.
So in respect to Nirvana, is it possible that actually, as Mataji was talking about evil we can learn from evil. So that means it is a way of telling that if you keep doing good, you will yourself, in the same life, you will be reborn again and be like the creator of Ramayana.
What do you think?
I couldn't quite hear what he said.
So that if you see what is evil in the world and you recoil from that, you do the good, and you can be transformed, almost a kind of not rebirth in the literal sense, but in a kind of spiritual sense. Yeah. You mean like seeing like Christian ideas of resurrection as a kind of metaphor for spiritual transformation? Yeah, and that conversation even happened within the Christian tradition, and I mean, eventually the dominant idea was what won out, but that those interpretations are there, yeah. That it means the transformation of the person, not a kind of afterlife thing. In that tradition, that's the understanding. Yeah. There.
So I think, yeah, we've come to the end of this session, very lively session, and we have a few minutes now before lunchtime, so we can leisurely make our way down. Then after this, well, there'll just be a half hour for singing this time. Yeah, so 1:30 to 2 o'clock, and then we have our very final session. So our thanks to Mataji and to Jeffrey both.